I did feel like doing much work after what happened to the corporation's main office. The winter had turned into a gray season for me. Nick still stuck on bed rest, and his eye had almost healed up. As far as anyone could tell, he wouldn't have any issue with his sight after the crack fully went away. When the weather started to get slightly warmer, a request came in for me to help on a corporation case. I had the time, so I accepted it regardless of whether Nick could join me or not. But after I heard where I would be headed, I nearly backed out. Some pretty odd things had recently been reported in an abandoned mental institution, and I did not want to deal with something like that. Despite my mind being filled with ideas about ghosts, I let myself get talked into it by Jimmy, who said accepting a case would do me some good. I think she was just tired of her boss moping around the office and would rather have me go out and risk my life in exchange for some peace. I arrived at a place that looked exactly how anyone would think an abandoned insane asylum would look. The air chilled my bones, and the sky cast a gray hue on everything. The most of the asylum's windows had been broken and then boarded up, and there was some black sludge dripping under the sills. I shuddered, wondering what could be on the inside of that place, yet knowing I did not want to learn the answer. I thought to myself that I might need a few vaccinations if I stepped on something rusty that night. Hearing my name, I turned to see who else had arrived. A pair I didn't think I would see again walked up, one of them being a pretty face that looked happy to see me. I hurried over to greet them, wondering what they were doing there because they weren't agents. "We volunteered to help," Elizabeth said cheerfully. Her hair had been cut to her shoulders, and she'd gained some weight since we last saw each other. Ernest followed behind silently, hidden under multiple layers, just trying to keep the cold away. He looked like a big scary bodyguard, but I knew that deep down he really was just a big softie. Tough, but a very nice person. I had learned a few asshole words, so I could use them if I saw him again. I really didn't know sign language, but he still looked flattered that someone put in the effort to learn enough to greet him. Elizabeth had grown up rich and spoiled. So much so that we met because her parents wanted to scare her to be productive. If she volunteered for agent cases, then I think it worked. "It's nice to see you too. Do you know anything about the job? I'm human, and no one ever tells me anything." She let out a laugh at my complaint. Opening her jacket, she handed over a gun with a holster, one different than what I normally used. When her coat opened, I could see just how much she'd packed for the job, and made me worried about what we might be facing. But her family provided bullets and other firearms to the corporation, so maybe she just always carried that many. She also handed me a piece of paper to be put away in a safe spot. I've heard it's some really spooky stuff. After some teens went missing doing, what's it called? Something about a tube. Anyway, they were exploring this place and just disappeared into thin air. Nothing solid on our end, but we're not risking it. That charm I handed you is to call backup. Your phone always messes up on cases, right? If we run into any trouble, rip the paper in half and it'll send a message to the main office like, "Ugh, something is eating my legs," and they'll shoot someone over. She didn't look stressed at all, even with the chance of a leg-eating monster inside. I nodded, keeping the charm in an outer jacket pocket, one that I could pull it out of quickly. I asked Nightshade and Nightingale to come by, but they refused. Something about them tinkering with an electrical book so it'll work around him, she said, shrugging. The back of my neck started to sweat. I bought him one of those Kindle reading tablets, but warned him it might not stay charged around him. Supernatural creatures and technology didn't mix well. It looked like he really wanted it to power on and had been working on it since I gave it to him. I couldn't tell her what kind of books he wanted to download. A scary gleam had came to his eyes after he found out just how many free adult-oriented books were available. I followed her inside, walking around trash and weathered parts of the building that had fallen off years ago. This place should be torn down. Ernest held Elizabeth's hand to help her walk over some bigger piles of junk. When I couldn't step over them, He carefully lifted me up by the back of my shirt and set me down on the other side. I should have been embarrassed, but silently thanked him for the help. I really don't sense any magic around. Maybe these kids were just taken by other humans for something else, Elizabeth offered. We still needed to verify everything, so we agreed to check the basement first and then work ourselves upwards. If my luck had anything to do with things, the creepy teenage leg eater would be in the creepy as hell basement. We found a half-molded map that told us where the basement steps were, then found out they'd collapsed years ago. I started to walk away when Ernest jumped down into the darkness, the sound of his feet making contact with the solid ground echoing up to us when he landed safely. He lit a glowing piece of paper to hold over his head. Elizabeth jumped down, and he caught her easily. They both gestured for me to do the same. I was about to go down into a dark, moldy basement without any way of getting out unless someone helped. This reeked of a dumb idea, but I never said I was smart. Jumping down, Ernest carefully set me on the ground after I landed in his arms. "I hope we don't come across anything," I said, trying to see in the dark. "I do. I want to shoot something," Elizabeth replied honestly. Maybe that scare tactic worked too well on her. She fearlessly led the way, a much different person than the one she was a few months ago when we met. I'd sent her a few messages, but both of us were busy with our lives to really stay in contact. She'd been trying to become more of a fighter after seeing how easy someone got the drop on her at a dinner party. The change made me respect her even more. As we continued down the corridor, darkness overtook everything. We walked along endless hallways covered in years of graffiti and neglect. Ernest shined a light in each empty room we passed by, only to find nothing. Not a single sign of any bodies or the missing teens. Drops of something kept falling from somewhere in the basement, and the floors showed some water damage in spots. I pulled my jacket up to my chin, hand at the ready to draw my gun. This place looked perfect for a horror movie, and my gut wasn't having it. "Do you think?" I had wanted to ask them if we could try and find a map, or start marking rooms to make sure we didn't get lost, when something tightened on my ankle. I looked down in the dim light to see a dark something curled around just above my shoe. My mind froze in fear. Neither of my companions reacted fast enough, and my leg got pulled out from under me, my body painfully hitting the ground. I could only thank God for my heavy winter jacket. The thing around my ankle dragged me along through rooms and through holes in the walls. I would have gotten cut up pretty badly if it wasn't for my thick winter clothing. Finally, I got to a room with some broken windows that let some gray light inside. A mass of vines in the middle of the large room were squirming, about to pull in the recent prey. I was lifted off the ground by my leg as more vines start to reach out. My hand found my gun, and I started shooting at them, trying to get them away until help arrived. A friend of mine in high school had a stupid joke he always liked to drop, or squeeze into a conversation, no matter if it fitted or not. I remembered his voice as he said, "I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going," and I could almost hear his nerdy laugh in that moment, which kept me calm enough to keep shooting. When the vines opened up and a large round mouth with rows of teeth appeared, I lost that calm and almost screamed. Elizabeth and Ernest slid into the room right then. He ran under my body as she pulled out two very large handguns and started firing. She cut the vine holding my leg, and I fell again into Ernest's arms. He ran, trying to get me out of danger before he attacked. For a moment, Elizabeth looked like she had everything under control. Even bigger guns came from under her jacket, and she yelled while firing them into the massive vines. Ernest set me down nearby, then ran directly at the monster to sweep any vines creeping closer to his employer. He trusted her not to shoot him in the back. I don't think I could do the same. The bullets did some damage, but more and more vines kept coming. She stomped her feet, frustrated, and her hair started to flame. Ernest did a double take knowing where this was headed and didn't like it. Fire appeared in her palms, and she ran towards the mass of dark vines. I stood, wondering if I really needed to be there. Ernest frantically covered her, ripping away anything before it got her from behind. He then moved in front, on one knee as she used him as a ramp to jump off of, right towards the monster's mouth. A blast of flames started to come from her hands. Ernest moved from in front of the creature, and to me in record time. He used his body to shield me from the huge explosion of fire shooting across the entire room. I could still feel the heat from the attack. Ernest forced us to stay still for a while, and when he pulled back, Elizabeth stood where the vines had once been. Pieces of still flaming vines littered the room. Both of their clothing were fireproof, but not my own. My ankle felt warm, and I saw my jeans were smoldering. I quickly smothered the smoking fabric. Cracking sounds came from the floor. We needed to get out of the building before it came down on us. We hadn't really figured out what happened to the missing teens other than the reasonable assumption that the vines got them. Elizabeth came over, carefully stepping around burnt pieces of plant matter. "You two fight pretty well together, like, totally in sync. It's impressive," I told her. She puffed out her chest, clearly flattered by the attention. I didn't think too many people praised her. Her family probably didn't have too many good things to say about the pair. We have been together for most of our lives, so naturally we're better than most of the pairs of agents. "No offense," she answered, very proud of herself. "You must love each other a lot," I said, somewhat to tease her. Her face turned almost as red as her hair as she quickly tried to refute the claim. More of the creaking and cracking rumbled through the room, which was a sign we should leave, but I had become pretty interested in our conversion. I can't. That wouldn't be right. My family pays him. I can't abuse my power like that. He just trusts me a lot, that's all. He can't really feel that way," she said quickly, hands raised trying to defend herself. I looked up at Ernest, who couldn't face me either. These two really needed someone to help them out on this, or else they would be doomed, ignoring the obvious for years. "You should ask him." The look I got from him could melt an iceberg. Confident in her denial, she turned to tell him to say I was wrong. His hands remained at his side and his face started to flush. He couldn't lie to her, and she started to get more nervous the more time that went on. I almost brought up the fact that we should leave the half-rotten basement before she finally lost it. There were a lot of choice words about why he didn't say anything sooner. His hands flew into motion, and I couldn't understand any of it, and only heard half the conversation. My mother. Who cares what my mother would approve of? To hell with her after all the stunts she's pulled. I only went after the rich bastards she wanted me to since I didn't think I had a chance with you, dumbass. I almost felt bad for what I started. A crack started to appear in the middle of the floor, with it sinking in a little. We really needed to leave. I tapped her arm, finding it a bit hot, and drew my hand back, my fingertips feeling a bit burned. Guys," I said, only to be ignored. Ernest signed something, totally flustered. "Damn straight we're getting married after this, and I want at least 6 kids." She huffed and crossed her arms. I grabbed both of their arms, getting their attention just as the rest of the floor fell apart from under us. At least the roof stayed intact, and we didn't have literal tons of the building coming down on our heads. I sat up, body aching from the fall in a pile of what had once been the floor. Ernest broke both of our falls, and I thought something like this would be easy enough for them to recover from. Neither of them looked very good. Elizabeth was against the wall of the new room we fell into, face strained. Under the basement, another floor had been built. This one was clean and new, as if it didn't belong to the abandoned structure above it. The walls were white, but covered in spell work. A door on the other side of the room had a hand scanner and a pin pad, and it looked to be the only way out if we couldn't jump out of the hole above us. I helped Ernest over to the wall to sit beside Elizabeth, to try and figure out what happened. This place is covered in magic that weakens supernatural creatures. From the looks of things, this is a hunter's lab. The corporation would have told us if they made this place," she explained in a tired voice. I looked up at the open ceiling, knowing there would be no way for me to get out on my own. I needed to break into a hunter's lab without my supernatural backup. That sounded way beyond my skill set. I couldn't even break through the first door. "Do you think anyone is working here? If they are, I don't think they'll approve of us crashing in like this," I said, watching the door and expecting it to open at any moment. Well, they should have taken care of the monster themselves then. Those damn hunters are always leaving messes for us to clean up. Carefully looking through her jacket, Elizabeth pulled out a gun with a very large barrel. I didn't even know how she fit it under her coat without it being noticeable. She might be weak, but her guns weren't. The weapon had to have a recoil so huge that I wouldn't be able to take it. Ernest once again shielded me and held his hands over my ears when she fired the monster of a gun right at the door, blowing it open. No alarms or panicked voices about an attack could be heard. She set aside her weapon, knowing that was as much as she could do. "Go check out what this place is. We'll try and get in contact with someone to pick us up. Meet us back here in 10 minutes, no matter what you find. Do you need some more weapons?" She pulled out another handgun, this one about half as long as my arm. I would probably break something if I fired that. She had already given me her smallest weapon, so I shook my head. One gun and some ammo should be enough for a quick look around. I didn't even want to have to use it. I hoped someone would be by soon to help. I walked over to the broken apart and still smoldering door, trying to decide if this job was worth it or not. Gun in hand and keeping low, I stepped through, careful not to step on anything still on fire. The place sounded empty. After the first turn in the hallway, I could see why. Dried blood covered a decent part of it. No bodies had been left behind, just the blood. Some fingertip marks and drag prints in the blood showed something had brought the men further inside the lab. My breathing started to get heavy and my hands trembled. For a moment, I wasn't in the lab, but back in the dark office with sounds of agents being killed in the distance. I shook my head, trying to get a hold of myself. If something bad happened here, I needed to figure out if anyone had survived and needed help. Hunters or not, they didn't deserve a death like this. I checked any open rooms I came across to see more of the same. Broken computers and papers stuck to the floor from the blood. No signs of life. I had to skip some rooms because of the locks. I tried shooting one open with no success. I needed to save my ammo, so I carried on, not knowing what might be behind those doors. I lost track of time and decided to head back when I saw something written on the wall. It read Main Bay in big bold letters with an arrow pointed down the hallway. I would check that, then go back. As I moved, the lights started to fail. The smell of blood grew, and I didn't know if I heard something, or if that was my mind bringing me back to the office again. Peeking around the doorway, I saw a wide open area below the floor I was on. A catwalk went around it. Boxes and other supplies could be seen piled in the corners. I thought I saw a person in the far end of the room. In the dim light, I couldn't be sure. Against my better judgment, I moved forward on the upper level to look over the railing, trying to see better. I didn't notice the room kept going under the walkway before it was too late. Something came crashing through under where I stood, and from deeper inside the building. By the time I took a step back, the floor under my feet rose and broke apart from whatever just moved under it. My body lurched forward, landed on the giant monster, and rolled off of it to the hard ground below. I didn't break anything, but got stuck on the lower level with a screaming creature. I got back up on one knee, gun raised, to look at what I would be facing. My stomach dropped and heart sank from the appearance. A huge red glowing gem floated in the middle, with bodies hovering around it in a circle. All of them were fused together in incredibly grotesque ways, all of them moving. So many voices mingled into one another, begging to be killed. Tears came to my eyes. I felt so much pity for them, but I didn't have enough bullets to help. What the hell had these hunters created? Another inhuman scream came from the gem in the middle. It moved, forcing the rest of the body to move with it. The mass of bodies shifted into something else. I shot, killing one person, only to hear hundreds more begging for death. An arm formed and reached for me, trying to add my body to the collection. I figured now would be the proper time to rip the charm in half, calling for backup. The only upside came from how slow this thing moved. It used up all its strength charging through to get to new meat inside the building. I could keep ahead of it by running behind boxes. The arm came down time and again, smashing through them and spilling out the contents, which were mostly canned food and other supplies. A few large cans of tuna cracked open when the boxes fell, so the monster ran the arm along the ground to add the fish to its mass. I fired, aiming at the gem, hoping for some damage. The bullets bounced off, useless. I regretted wasting them on the gem, instead of using them to end the lives of a few of the ones fused with others. The horrible thing slowly recovered its strength. Each attack brought it closer and closer until I was running just to stay alive. The only doors left were locked shut. I directed the monster's attacks over to them so it could maybe break down a door or two for me, but found I couldn't reach them afterwards. A quicker than expected arm clipped my side, sending me flying into the last standing piles of boxes. It knocked the wind from my lungs and stopped my body cold. Everything hurt, my head swam, the arm started to come down again, and my eyes focused on those twisting bodies, fearing that would be my fate in the next few seconds. The moment before that arm made up of others came down, someone got in front of me. With a perfect arc, they landed a punch on the arm, blasting it to pieces. The gem reeled back, screaming and shuffling to the other side of the room to recover. I stared at the one who saved my life. I'd never met him before. He looked older than myself, maybe in his 50s. He wore a soft blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, which showed off that the arm he hit the creature with had been colored black. It slowly faded, returning to normal. He met my eyes and smiled with the warmest expression I'd ever seen before. In that moment, I nearly swooned from the mixture of just getting saved, and from just how friendly he looked. Reaching out a hand, he lifted me back to my feet. When I got back up, I looked down. The person who swooped in and clearly held a huge power stood much shorter than myself. The top of his head came up to my eye. I've met shorter people, but for some reason his height added to his appeal. You did a good job holding it off until I got here. Can I keep asking for your help? He said, looking up with another bright smile. The expression on his face so intense, I needed to look away. How his grin caused wrinkles to appear next to his eyes did something to my head. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't attracted to him, but I instantly wanted to call him uncle or something along those lines. He was also completely oblivious to the effect he had on others. I can't really do much, I admitted. The creature started to get ready for another attack. The newcomer shook his head and raised both hands in a boxer stance. The top button of his shirt was undone, and his collar opened to show a bunch of necklaces made of claws hanging loose against his chest. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, so I didn't know if he worked for the corporation or not. I need you to do something really important. I know you can handle it. Just keep its attention so I can get powered up. The creature tested its luck and shot out a smaller arm, only to have it knocked back by the newcomer, his hand turning black on contact. I doubted I could really help. I shook my head while I looked at the monster, my gun feeling useless in my hand. What's your name? I'm Moore. Now wasn't the time for introductions. I quickly told him my name, and he smiled again. That smile cemented the fact I would be calling him uncle at some point. Skylar, I know you can do it. I believe in you. What was this guy? How could some encouragement do so much? A little embarrassed, I ran forward to do my part. The gem monster seemed a bit scared at first from losing a part of itself, then got braver. I nearly got caught when I tripped over some leftover cans in the middle of the room. Moore's kind words ran through my head, and I got back on my feet just as the huge arm came down. It swept the floor, kicking up anything left behind with a crazy amount of force behind it. Cans hit my legs and back, bruising me and nearly breaking something. Some small bits of wood cut through my jeans, hurting like hell, but causing no major damage. I could still move and run. When the arm got too close, I shot it. One bullet was enough to make it duck back, only to have it come back seconds later, infuriated. My body felt worn down. My chest hurt from running, and I got backed into a corner again. The monster got in front of me, and there was no sign of where Moore had gone. I almost lost hope as the thing started to change again. The bodies cried out, fusing into something similar to a ring of wings made of flesh. The red gem in the middle glowed brightly, a high-pitched sound coming from it. The sound grew louder until it shook the walls. Holding my hands over my ears did nothing to help keep the noise out. Then, a red light burst from the gem directly at my defenseless body. My eyes could barely stay open due to the light when I saw Moore appear, his arms black and sparkling. He punched one arm forward, knocking some of the light away. Then his second hand forced a blast of magic that caused the light and all the power to be directed upwards, tearing through everything in its path. The entire world shook as the light overtook my senses. The building exploded and melted away from the red light at the same time, all while the smaller man forced it back with his bare hands. When everything stopped rumbling and the light faded, I opened my eyes to look around to see what happened. Almost everything was gone from the blast. I worried about Ernest and Elizabeth. I walked out from the small part of the room I had managed to survive in, looking over the crater the attack had left in the ground. Small parts of the building remained, but not much. The dirt was bleached white. Moore stood by the big cracked gem, now black and lifeless. I caught his eye, and he gave a thumbs up. Seriously, who was this guy? From the top of the slope, I heard Elizabeth calling for me. She started to slide down so we could meet back up. When Moore first arrived, he'd gotten them somewhere safe first. They helped me out of the huge hole a building had once stood on top of. Looking over the sheer destruction of it all, I turned to Elizabeth. "Please don't tell Nick about any of this," I pleaded. He would understandably freak out if he knew I'd been anywhere near the blast. She nodded, following my train of thought. They left to submit a report and meet up with the cleanup crew that was now coming down the road. Moore came outside holding some of the gem parts, so he could hand them over to be studied. He then said he needed to be somewhere else. Blowing a whistle, his ride appeared. A huge flaming horse that looked like it came from hell itself came out of thin air to pick him up. He easily got on despite his short stature. Honestly, Moore was the coolest person I'd met in a while. "Thanks for your help. Sorry I couldn't come sooner. I've been really busy lately," he said, petting the side of the horse to calm it down. "I wish I could do more. It sucks being human sometimes," I said, thinking back to just how little I had done. "You did great. Just a bit more experience, and you'll be as strong as me someday. I'm human, and before I traded my arms with a necromancer, I wasn't nearly as tough as you," Moore said, stunning me. He was human. The guy sitting on a flaming horse, and who just took out an entire building, was human. My mouth dropped open a little, looking at his arms and trying to figure out what kind of creature he did a trade with. From what I knew, necromancers were strong and often did some pretty crazy stunts out of boredom. We'd only come across two so far, and one was so powerful the corporation couldn't do anything against it even if they tried. "You didn't happen to trade with Fee by chance, did you?" I asked slowly. Moore's face lit up as if I had mentioned a mutual friend, and not a nearly insane monster of untold power. "Oh, you met him? Kind of hard to deal with, isn't he? But easy enough to get on his good side. I came across him trying to find a student of his." You wouldn't have met a tall, skinny necromancer with long black hair. Kind of a terrible person. I nodded, thinking of how crazy the chances were that I'd met both of them. I explained what I knew, and how we had briefly seen the person he'd been chasing after. I assumed the reason was to take him down, considering all the horrible things that necromancer student had pulled. Moore thanked me for the information, glad to learn whatever he could even if it wasn't positive. He handed over his phone number so I could call him in case I found out anything else, or if I ever needed help with something. Are you trying to kill that other necromancer? I mean, he must have done something awful for you to do all of this, I said. At one point, Moore had lived a normal human life. Then he turned to magic, found an insanely strong creature, and gave up his own arms in order to track down a single person. To go so far must mean he had to have a good reason for it all. Oh, I'll end up giving him a good punch in the face, that's for sure. But we were supposed to have a date, and the bastard ran off like a coward. Moore said with a laugh. I nearly choked. The person in front of me acted like the nicest person on the planet, so I had to wonder what the hell had got him interested in such a sleazy necromancer. Seeing my face, Moore knew what had gone through my head. He smiled again and went on. Neff has a lot of issues. There are some reasons for him doing what he does, but that doesn't justify it. He's hurt a lot of people, but I need to find him and save him. I just can't leave it alone and let him keep suffering. Now it made sense. Moore being such a good person led to him to try to save everyone, even if they didn't deserve it. His horse grew impatient and slammed its back hooves down. Moore patted its side again, signaling he was almost ready to leave. I didn't really want him to go just yet, but promised we would see each other again at some point. After Moore left, an agent took a hold of my arm, saying Abarash sent for me. I felt confused on what she could want in such a hurry. With barely any time to recover after the case, I got tossed through a car door, which opened into the office. Abarash was on the other side, quickly getting me back up. We have a pretty serious meeting about Nick and the whole office thing. I was worried after we got the legs being eaten call, and I sent one of our best guys to help out. Her quick speech and fast steps were hard to keep up with. With my clothing covered in dirt and bits of wood still in my leg, I didn't look ready for a meeting, but she didn't look like she noticed. We made our way down more hallways, and she shoved me inside a room. Anker was already sitting at a long desk with two other people on the other side. The man with the gray hair shot up, his face red upon seeing me enter. What the hell is he doing here? He spat and stood up. He was one of the leaders of the hunters, and the same person I had punched. His assistant was trying to get him to calm down and sit. This is Skylar West, Nicola's partner. He has every right to be here. Please sit back down, Justice. Anker said as calmly as he could. He did not sit back down. This meeting was already going off the rails. I snorted at his name, and that got him even more riled up. Abarash looked at both of us, confused, since she had not heard about what happened between me and the leader the last time we had met. I cannot believe the insults your company has thrown my way. First, we find out you're hiding a perfect stone, then you drag him here. Looking over to Abarash, I saw her mouth moving, questioning what I did. She tried saving the situation and asked us to sit down. Justice felt pressured to get back into his chair, so he did so while fuming. We did not hide a stone from you, and Nicholas is not perfect. Anker started, just to get cut off. A stone made by human hands. You creatures have no say over it. We should be the one using. Excuse me, I shouted, getting back up. Abarash had her face in her hands, seeing what kind of a disaster this meeting had turned into so quickly. Anker made no attempt to make me sit back down. He silently seethed at being cut off by Justice, so he let me go off on him. Justice turned, ready to shout back, but I didn't let him. Nick isn't some object to be passed around. He wants to be an agent to help people, and that's exactly what he's been doing. If he doesn't want to work for you, it's because you all don't do jack shit to help anyone but yourselves. I'd gotten up at the end of the desk as the other man did the same. His face turned red from anger, unable to deal with anyone talking back to him due to the position he held. He refused to let anyone insult his company and way of life. I could have been a bit nicer, but also refused to back down when someone demanded my partner be turned over like he was a simple tool. He shouted something back that included something about my mother. I honestly agreed on him on that statement. He got angry from my lack of reaction, so he said something pretty nasty about Nick, and I just lost it. I lunged for him and started beating him up. Abarash stood up, too late to stop me, while Ankar sat still just watching the entire thing. We both fought like children, his palm pressed against my face hard, trying to break my nose. Not knowing what a mistake he had made, I opened my mouth to bite his hand as hard as I could. Everyone in the room moved to separate us then. I could have sworn I saw Ankar smile as he lifted me off my feet by the back of my shirt. Abarash stood in the middle, while Justice had his hand bandaged by his assistant, who worked so hard to hold in his laughter to the point of having tears in his eyes. The spiteful hunter was screaming that they needed to do something about me, and to do a blood test to see if I carried anything. I just snapped my mouth at him twice to make him shut up. Back to the reason why you are here. Skylar is correct. You have no say over Nicholas. No one but himself does. He may have broken through the building, but that act nearly killed him. He is not as powerful as you think. Ankar explained, still holding me up. He still has power. In the wrong hands, the entire world can be changed, Justice snapped. And that is why it is best that Skylar stays with him. In the past few months that they have worked together, he has not once been tempted to use that power, even if he has his own very valid reasons to do it. He sees his partner as a friend, and as you just learned firsthand, he will do anything to protect him. Justice gritted his teeth at those words. Blood in the shape of a bite mark came through the white cloth he had wrapped around his hand. He wanted to take Nick for himself. The power could greatly help the hunters with their goal of removing every supernatural creature, but he couldn't force his hand to get the corporation to hand Nick over. Cursing, he knew this meeting was over, and not in his favor. We'll review this at a further date, and get his blood tested to make certain I didn't get infected by anything. Pointing a finger, he turned and stormed out the room. We all stayed silent for a while. Abarash finally faced us, very displeased in the outcome. As my punishment, I still hadn't been set down. I really don't think I'll ever understand how men think. Ankar, why didn't you stop him? She questioned. He could easily have broken up the fight before it got out of hand. The fact that he hadn't could only mean one thing. I don't like that man. He earned it. With a groan, Abarash forced him to set me down, and then hit his chest, which did nothing. Then I got dragged away to the medical rooms for that blood test. Not because Justice asked for it, but because Abarash thought he might have something that I could have caught when I bit him. We found Serval, who took some blood samples and nearly cried from laughing so hard after heard the reason why I needed my blood drawn. Have you seen Nick? He should have been with us in that meeting. Not that it would have done any good. Abarash said, after Serval was finished. She nodded and directed us to a storage room. Opening the door, we saw something that should not be in the office. A small house made of Legos. A lot of Legos. With working windows that could open. From inside, Luna poked their head out. I didn't know why Serval brought us over here. I loved seeing Luna again, but they didn't get along with Nick at all. At least, the last time I checked they didn't. The other window opened and my partner also poked his head out. I held back laughing as Abarash started to scream. The meeting was today. I told you 100 times, where were you? She demanded. In the Lego house, he answered honestly. Why are you in the Lego house? For tea, she groaned, hitting her head against the doorframe a few times. When Nick asked about how the meeting went, I told him the truth and said I bid justice. Luna laughed, and Nick appeared to understand why the meeting went down that road. I'm pretty sure he had avoided it for a reason. I asked when him and Luna had become friends. Since Luna came by to the medical rooms often, they would see each other. After Luna found out Nick just wanted to be an agent to keep helping others, they forgave Nick for trying to kill them when they first met. As far as I could tell, they'd been playing around on occasion when Nick should have been on bed rest. He noticed how dirty I looked, and I totally forgot about the bits of wood still in my leg. I asked Abarash or Serval to take care of that for me, as Nick looked worried. I refused to tell him about the case I'd been on earlier that day. Serval wheeled a chair over so I could sit down while she treated my legs, just as Nick found an issue with their Lego house. The door wasn't big enough for him to fit through. I haven't really watched too many horror movies since working with supernatural creatures, but I do remember the scene in one of the Evil Dead movies where one of the friends got trapped in the cellar, and they begged their friends to let them out. Nick was stuck inside the Lego house because he didn't want to break it, and hearing him asking me in a calm voice to help him get free reminded me of that scene. If he did get to me, it would be all over. I knew he would find some bubble wrap and wrap me up like a burrito, so I wouldn't go on any more dangerous cases without him. When Luna finally gave him permission to break free, I'd never been so scared in my life. I made a run for it, but got tackled to the ground in seconds. Over an hour later, Enkare arrived looking for the blood test results to send off so he could shut Justice up. None of us had a good explanation when he saw me wrapped in a thick layer of bubble wrap, with only my head and feet sticking out. He gave us all a look like a disappointed father after seeing what kind of stupid nonsense his kids had gotten up to. Instead of yelling, he calmly took the blood test results in one hand, then grabbed the mess of bubble wrap in the other to drag me into the hallway. I felt terrified over what he had planned for me, which was kicking the roll of bubble wrap with me inside so hard that I flew down the hallway and bounced off the elevator door. Abarash had long since left, being fed up with us, and would probably refuse to believe Enkare would do such a thing, resulting in the perfect crime. Aside from his anger issues, Enkare deep down had the same dumb thought process like the rest of us. If he would have cut me loose from my cushy prison, I would have gotten a better opinion of him. Still trapped, I was forced to listen to an hour-long lecture until Nick finally got me home. Then right back to the medical office because the knife my partner used to cut the bubble wrap off turned out to be too sharp. Serval looked over at us with disappointment as she gave my upper arm a few stitches. I could have been fused into a gem monster or eaten by a bunch of vines that day, so I guess a few stitches were fine in comparison.